Hello everyone, Nick Templin here from Templin Scouting, and today we're going to be doing our first mock draft for the 2023 draft. I know I'm a bit late to the game here. I've actually spent this past year working an internship for an NHL team in communications, and that has been a really great experience for me. And during that time, I wanted to focus on that. So I've been away from this YouTube channel, but with the season having come to an end for my team that I was working for, I'm happy to be back and making more draft-related videos for this channel because it is something that I really enjoy doing, and hopefully I'm going to be doing a lot more this off-season. And with the draft lottery happening just 2 days ago now, and Chicago being announced as the team that will draft Bedard, I wanted to get my first mock draft out with the proper starting order, at least for the draft. Obviously some things will change at the back end depending on how the playoffs wrap up here, but this will be at least mostly accurate for where teams will be drafting. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. So this is a screenshot taken from tankathon.com, just outlining what the order as of right now will be for the draft, and obviously depending on who ends up in the conference finals, we'll change that. Actually, we're missing the bottom two teams on there, which is funny, but of course my brain is thinking it's 6 years ago when there was still only 30 teams. Anyways, so ready to get started here. It's no brainer for the Chicago Blackhawks. Connor Bedard is a generational player. He is going to come in there and instantly be their best player. They have a lot of money to work with this offseason that they're going to have to find some talent to play alongside him so that they can develop him properly. But, it's going to be kind of a long rebuild here for the Chicago Blackhawks, and getting Connor Bedard to start it off really, it makes a huge difference. It accelerates things. It'll help them bring in talent that otherwise wouldn't be interested in signing there right now. So, it's huge for their organization. All controversy aside, just talking about the player and the team, it's a big deal. I have him, my comparables are Patrick Kane and Jack Hughes because, for me, he reminds me a ton of Patrick Kane as a player, but he is a center, and he's a good center at that because he is a guy who works hard in his own end. Has good enough two-way value where he's going to be a center at the next level. And it's definitely where you're going to want to have him. So that's where kind of the Jack Hughes aspect of it comes in, where you got this really skilled, talented forward, great playmaking player, but mostly a really great shooter. His release is unbelievable. He's probably going to threaten the league for 50 goals at some point, if not multiple times during his career. So, overall, huge for the Blackhawks to win this lottery and be able to select this player. With the second overall pick, I actually have what might be a bit of a controversial pick here with the Anaheim Ducks. I have them taking Leo Carlson. I think a lot of people have Adam Fantilli penciled in as the absolute number one. Number two, number one after Bedard. But I'm going to explain a little bit why I actually prefer Leo Carlson, depending on the team. Leading up to this, it was going to depend heavily on what team was drafting second and what player fit more with the organization. So in the case of Leo Carlson, the reason why I like him in Anaheim is because he allows them to have a really good second line center that can be both really good offensively and also take on the defensive matchups that you don't necessarily want a guy like Zegras to take. Whereas if you're drafting Fantilli, you're going to be asking either Zegras or Fantilli to be the guy who takes on the more defensive assignments as a centerman in the top six. So I think when you compare their abilities on the back check and in their own zone and positioning and having an active stick and stuff, Leo Carlson definitely takes the lead at that aspect of the game. He's also a very pro-ready player. They both are, but he's a guy who does all the little things really well, really good in the cycle game. He's they use him on the power play as the one-time shot. Even though maybe shooting isn't necessarily his strongest aspect of his game, he still has a really effective shot, and is a guy who can score probably somewhere between 30 or 25 to 30 goals a season. And is definitely going to threat for like 70 points a season, and but is mainly going to be really useful as an all-around player. He's got a good physical side to his game as well. I have his comparable as Anze Kopitar. That's kind of the ceiling for him, I think, where he can definitely be that really, really reliable two-way center. And I think the way that I've kind of described the two players between Fantilli and Carlson is Carlson is the kind of guy that will win you Conn Smythe trophies, or that will win a Conn Smythe trophy for himself, and Fantilli is the kind of guy that can win scoring titles. So it really just depends what your team needs more at that second position, and really I think that's what the Ducks need more. Moving on to third, obviously not a bad consolation prize for the Columbus Blue Jackets. They get the guy that many people consider to be the second best player in this draft. Now, Fantilli is really, really interesting to watch. I mean, very unique in a lot of aspects of his game, mainly his shooting. I find that he shoots in a really, really unique way when he comes in off the rush. He likes to shoot off of his front foot, so he doesn't generate as much power doing it that way, but he definitely does it in a way that deceives the goalies. It's a quick release, and it's not really something that you see all that often, but it definitely works for him, and we'll see if it works for him at the next level. But he definitely has the ability to shoot any way that he wants to, so he's going to be fine either way. He's got a good playmaking ability too, but I think he's primarily going to be a scorer at the next level. I think he's going to focus mostly on the goals aspect of the game. So definitely a great thing for the Blue Jackets to get here. He gets the opportunity, if he does sign right away, to play in between Laine and Gaudreau to start his career. And I think right now the Blue Jackets are in a situation where they have a lot of assets that they could potentially move for more forwards, because they have so many great defensive prospects right now that they can kind of slot a bunch of them in and trade some of the excess. And I'm going to be doing some off-season prediction videos soon, and there's a trade that I really like as an option for them that I'm going to kind of discuss further in one of those videos. I have his comparable as Steven Stamkos. I don't know if he's as good on the one-timer as Stamkos, but shooting off the rush and just being that style of centerman, that's where he kind of compares to Steven Stamkos in my books. Moving on to number 4. Now, this might be a bit of a controversial selection, and I don't blame anybody for thinking that, and I'm just going to kind of go into my reasoning why this isn't Matvei Michkov here in a bit, but I'm going to first talk about Zach Benson, because he's a player who throughout this process I haven't really known how to think about him, because obviously the things that stand out right away are the production. His production was fantastic. He was the point leader on the most stacked team in junior hockey this year with the Winnipeg Ice. Obviously he's got a lot of offensive talent to him. He's definitely a fast forward, speedy winger. He brings a lot of skill to the position. He's a good playmaker, good finisher, a lot of those things. Very flashy player in general. For me, he's a little hard to rate because I don't necessarily see a whole lot of NHL projectable things from him. He's also very small, and I don't mean the height, because at 5'10", you're perfectly fine. He's going to have to put on a decent amount of weight to make it at the next level. Right now he's listed at just under 160 pounds at 159. At the very least, you'd like to see him somewhere in the 170s. To be able to play in the NHL, but that's okay because you're probably going to be waiting a couple of years on him anyways. Maybe just 1 year of development to see what happens, and then hopefully try and get him into the lineup after that. For me, it's tough to project where Michkov will go, because the biggest thing with him obviously is the contract in Russia that it's going to be a challenge for GMs to kind of figure out if they're willing to take a player that they have to wait 3 years for, because a lot of these guys at the top of the order with the GM jobs, they have to wonder if they're still going to be the GM by the time that Michkov actually gets to be part of their team. And I think for San Jose, they're a team that can consider that, because obviously Mike Greer has only just been hired for them to do the job. So potentially he feels that there's some safety there. But I think if there's an opportunity to bring in a player who's is going to be pretty good, and he's going to be there earlier and has a chance to kind of help you keep your job, then I think that GMs are going to kind of lean that way over a guy like Michkov. And obviously, it's definitely something to think about. It's not necessarily that I think Benson's the better player. I think Michkov might be the second best player in this draft. By the time that he comes over, he will be for sure. But it's just one of those things where something outside the control of the general managers and the team may just kind of affect a guy's draft stock just a little bit, but not a whole lot, because I do have him going 5th overall. I think Kent Hughes is a guy who is going to start to feel pretty secure in his role. They're kind of going for the long-term rebuild here, but they've already got a lot of the pieces that they need there in Montreal. So just adding another one that can join them in 3 years' time, once the other guys have gotten their development on track, and they're guys like Slavkovsky, who should be much better than he was obviously as a rookie by that point. So he's a really interesting player to talk about. He's definitely on the smaller side with his weight as well. He's got to put on quite a bit, but he's got lots of time to do that. So not a huge concern. He's a really smart player, really talented offensively. He can find passes on the ice that you didn't even know were there. But when you go back and watch it, you realize, wow, that was there the whole time, but you just have no idea how he saw that. He's just that kind of player. I mean, great shot too, great finishing abilities. He's definitely a guy who can threaten for 100 points at the NHL level. I have his comparable right now as Cole Caulfield. I think he's actually a better player than Cole Caulfield is. He might not be as good of a scorer, but he's going to be a more well-rounded and better playmaking player than Cole Caulfield. But size-wise, speed-wise, a lot of things in that area, they're very similar players. So I think Montreal definitely wouldn't complain about getting another player that's very similar to Cole Caulfield in that aspect. Moving on to number 6 now. This might be a bit early for a lot of people's likings, but David Reinbacher going 6th overall to the Coyotes. The way I look at it is, one, the Coyotes right now, it's hard to really like their defensive prospect pool. Obviously now as well, the roster losing their top defenseman in Jacob Chychrun, that it's hard to kind of tell who their top defenseman really is now. It was really Juuso Välimäki for most of last season, so it's a position that they need to get a lot better in. And if you look at their forward group, their prospect pool there is, at least a little bit better. They've got Logan Cooley, who's going to be coming soon. They've got Gunther, who should be a full-time NHL player next year, and they've obviously got Connor Geekie as well, who was a high pick for them in last year's draft. So this is a position of need that they really need to address. And David Reinbacher is without a doubt the best defenseman in this draft class. He just has so much skill in both ends of the ice. He is a good puck mover, a really smart player with the puck. He's got a great shot from the point, and it seems to be the way that he scores his goals and generates points. And it's something that he was doing quite well in the playoffs in the Swiss League. Obviously right-handed defenseman as well, so that's something that's of good value. A lot of the top defensemen in this draft are all right-handed, which is really good for teams that need that. As we get on, we're going to kind of realize that really good defensemen are going to start slipping down in the draft, because it is a more forward-heavy draft. So some teams are going to get some pretty good players at defense, kind of later on in the draft as well. So this is a bit earlier than a lot of people think. I think a lot of people think that no defenseman is going to go inside the top 10. But I think that when you have a guy who is maybe a year away from being pro ready, and shows all the skills of being a really well-rounded defenseman, is available. Sometimes those guys go a lot higher than we expect. It happened with Mo Seider, it happened with Jake Sanderson, who I have as comparable here. So, I think that he's definitely an interesting name to keep an eye on as we get closer to the draft. The one weakness I will point out that I noticed from watching him this season is that he will occasionally pinch on plays that he shouldn't have pinched on. He'll kind of get caught up in the play every now and again, but it's something that I think will be coached out of him pretty easily, because aside from that, he seems like a really smart and well-rounded defensive player. So I'm sure that if he gets into a system with a coach that asks him to take less risks, then I'm sure that it's something that he can adapt to fairly easily. Coming up next with number 7, we've got Dollarvorski. For me, I've really liked what I've seen more from him lately, especially as he went into the playoffs in the J20 in Sweden. Because he played mostly in Allsvenskan, which is Swedish second league, and he played quite well there all season, but he didn't really get the opportunity to really dominate like he would in a junior league. So heading there for the playoffs, he really got to showcase his talent against his own age group, which really solidified him for me as a top 10 player. He's really well rounded. I mean, great on faceoffs. He's really physical. You'd maybe like to see him get a little bit more physical because he's great size. I mean, for his age, already over 200 pounds. He's and still a really great skater, good speed, really high effort player. And we're going to kind of talk about a player later on in this draft that is probably twice or 3 times as talented as Dvorsky, but that I can't put over him because his effort level is so low. Dvorsky is a guy who's going to give you 100% on every shift. He's a guy who'll drive the net hard. He gets a lot of deflections, just a lot of plays like that. And I think that's something that the Flyers are really value right now, especially if Tortorella remains their coach for a decent amount of the future. He's a guy that I think Tortorella is going to like a lot. And so next up, the 8th overall pick. Some people will say he fell here. I think that even for my personal rankings, this may actually be a bit high. He's a bit of a controversial player in my opinion, and I'm actually looking at this picture now, and I'm not 100% sure if that's him because that's not his number, but maybe that was his number last year. I don't know. Anyways, we're going to talk about Will Smith here, and he is a player that most people have penciled in as a top 5 pick. A lot of people have him above Zach Benson. Some people even have him as the 4th overall if they think that Michkov will fall. And don't get me wrong, I mean, his production this year was off the charts. I mean, you always get a couple of guys with the U.S. development program that will really wow you with their production, and obviously he's got a lot of skill as well in the offensive end. I mean, he makes some really, really special plays sometimes. But to talk about the reason why I, am so low on him personally, is that when I've watched him, his effort level is just not where it needs to be. I mean, he doesn't back check. He will go in for one offensive rush and then start skating back, hobbled over, and either go to the bench or just hang at the opposing team's blue line and wait for a pass while his wingers do all the back checking. And it's something that I don't know if the coach with the U.S. development program has asked him to kind of play that way, because I can't imagine a coach being all that definitely wouldn't want him to play that way, because you're definitely putting the rest of your team at a disadvantage by asking them to play a role that's outside of what they would have been brought up to learn how to play as a winger. But he's a really high skill player, so I think that the Washington Capitals would be a really good landing spot for him if he does get an opportunity to play with a guy like Ovechkin, or if Oshie's still there. I think Oshie would make a really good line mate for him because he's a winger that can really handle the defensive aspect of the job. But I think for Will Smith, I think there's definitely the opportunity for him to improve. I think he's a smart guy. I think that he's definitely got a high IQ with hockey. I think that with the right coaching and at Boston College next year, he will get the opportunity to become a more well-rounded player, and if that becomes the case, then he is definitely one of the top players in this draft. But it's just definitely one of those what-ifs that will definitely make people wonder. I think as coaches start, or as as scouting teams start to watch more of his full game tapes leading up to the draft process, I think that we're going to see a bit of a slip on him. But there's also the alternative that he interviews really well at the combine. They talk to him about his weaknesses. If he's self-aware about them, then I think that's going to go a long way towards helping him remain a top 5 prospect in this draft. But based off of what I know right now, this is definitely the highest that I can put him. With the 9th overall pick, we've got the Detroit Red Wings selecting Kobe Barlow. Now, Kobe Barlow is definitely one of my favorite players to talk about in this draft, and the reason why is because he is such an amazing goal scorer. And I was going to say he's such an amazing pure goal scorer, but that's only really true if you look at his stats. If you watch his film, you'll see that on a lot of plays, he actually he creates a lot of passing opportunities and playmaking opportunities because teams cheat over to him so much to try and prevent the shot. And I think that that's going to continue to be the thing with him once he moves on to the NHL. He is going to be a player that demands a lot of attention as a one-timer guy, as a guy coming in on the rush. Who has just a wicked release, wicked wrist shot, and what I'm impressed with him as well is guys like him who are such pure goal scorers. Sometimes they don't, and at the winger position they don't necessarily have the effort to come back into their own end. But I see him back checking a lot, and he really does take away the trailing winger or the trailing defenseman quite often, and definitely does a good job playing the point as a winger in his own defensive zone. So just definitely a player that impresses me in a lot of ways, and I have him as comparable to Pasternak. I think that's the ceiling there. So definitely would be a great pick for the Wings to select here within the top 10. Moving on to the Blues, we've got Ryan Leonard, and Ryan Leonard is another guy with the U.S. development program. I think he finished 3rd on the team in points this year, but I might have to triple check that. So he is another centerman, just a little bit shorter than Will Smith, not by much, but he has a really good playmaking ability, good finishing ability. If anybody watched recently at the under 18s, he had a really good performance there. Now, I didn't love a lot of the highlights from that clip because I think the team was kind of playing differently against these international teams than they would ordinarily, where they were making kind of overly fancy plays and passes because they knew they could get away with it. So I like to take that tournament a little bit with a grain of salt, but I was still impressed with his skating and his hands and passing abilities. So definitely a player that I think the Blues would be smart to get here. I think the Blues have definitely a few prospect area holes that they would like to fill. Obviously, they made some good trades and selected some good players over the past couple of years, so they're starting to build that up again. But I think for them, they're just in a situation of take the best player available, and I think for them, they're going to believe that Ryan Leonard is that best player available. Moving on to the 11th pick, we're going on a bit of a run of U.S. development player picks here. So next up, we've got Oliver Moore with the Vancouver Canucks pick here. I've definitely been impressed with him. He's kind of been the opposite of Will Smith to me throughout this process, where I found that his talent level isn't necessarily as high, but his effort level is quite a bit higher, and I think he's going to be a guy that you can coach to be a matchup centerman against other teams' top lines. And he definitely has enough of an offensive side to his game that you're going to see good production from him. Obviously, I have Erik Haula here as his comparable, so that might not thrill people at the 11th overall pick, but I think if you look throughout Erik Haula's career, he's been a really important player for a lot of really good teams, I think, and maybe he hasn't necessarily gotten it done in the playoffs, as far as winning it all, but I think he's been a really important role guy with offensive upside that teams have kind of coveted throughout his entire career, and I think Oliver Moore will kind of be a similar player. And when I look at the Canucks, they definitely are. They have a few guys that could fill their number 2 center role right now in their organization, I think, but they're looking to probably add a little bit of competition for that because they don't think they have a guy that they feel will guarantee that spot. And that's specifically talking about if JT Miller continues to play the wing or if they do end up trading JT Miller, because it'll kind of be between Moore and Aatu and potentially Lekaramäki, but I think Lekaramäki will be primarily a winger when he gets to the NHL. So anyways, definitely a lot of guys that are looking to potentially battle for the number 2 center role behind Elias Pettersson, and I think that Oliver Moore would be definitely a guy that you could slot in there, but if it didn't work out, at the very least, I think he'd be a very good third-line center. So definitely, I think just one of those team fit kind of picks for the Vancouver Canucks. Next up, we've got the Arizona Coyotes with the pick they got from Ottawa in the Jacob Chychrun deal, and I have them selecting Andrew Cristall. Now, if you look at Andrew Cristall's production this year, I mean, it was the second best among draft eligible forwards or draft eligible players in the WHL this year, and one of the best since 2000, I believe. So when you look at that, I mean, early on in my rankings, he was a top 10 player, and a lot of that stemmed from the fact that his skill level is really high. His hands are fantastic. He's a really great passer, really great shooter, just a really, really good offensive player. But where he starts to kind of fall off a little bit for me is because a player with his skill set and his abilities, you would want him to be just a little bit of a better skater than he is. He's not the most effective skater, and he's a guy who almost needs to totally revamp his style of skating, I think, to be the best player that he can be at the next point, which means his development curve could take a really long time. And he's a guy that really high upside, really high ceiling, but the floor is really low on him, where, potentially, you could be waiting on him for far too long, and he's going to have to be a guy who's really mentally strong, I think, to battle through and make it to the next level. So he's a guy that you're going to have to really like in the interview process and at the combine and everything, but, he's got a lot of the tools there. It's just going to be developing them to get to the next level, because if he does, then he has the upside of being like an 80-90 point player, as long as he does his development the right way and as long as the team develops him the right way. But there's always the possibility, and you see it all too often in the NHL, where a guy with high talent that takes a little bit longer, they kind of give up on him and they don't develop him right through to the end. And so those are kind of the concerns that I have with a guy like Andrew Cristall. But I have him as his comparison is Jonathan Marchessault. I think size-wise, skill-wise, all those things, fairly comparable to Marchessault in that way. Moving on to number 13 here, we've got the Buffalo Sabres selecting Matthew Wood. I think the Sabres are in a situation where they just need to draft the best player available. They really have every position figured out, I would say, right now. They could maybe add a little bit of depth on defense, but I think right now they have just a lot of really good players in their system, and so they go out and they add Matthew Wood, who was the best contributor among draft eligibles in the NCAA this year for the University of Connecticut. And he plays the wing and center, but I think he'll be mostly a winger at the next level. Good size, definitely like that a lot. He's definitely a guy that could use some work on his skating, but definitely a skilled player, definitely a guy who I think could use to learn to drive the net a little bit harder, use his size a little bit more, because he's going to get stronger as he makes his way to the NHL. Once he has that strength, trying to use it to push through to the net, because he doesn't really fit the mold of what you would consider a power forward right now, which is why I have him compared to Drake Batherson, who's a bit of a taller guy, not a lot of size on him, that uses more of his offensive instincts, his playmaking skills, that kind of thing. That's kind of where Matthew Wood is at right now. But I think that, if you develop him properly, he's a really good middle six winger. And I think that he's somebody that fits the mold of, what the Buffalo Sabres could potentially need going forward. So this will be potentially my most controversial pick in the entire mock draft here, because it's a player that I'm really high on that nobody else really seems to be. So we're going to talk about him for sure, and we're going to talk about the fit with the Pittsburgh Penguins and why they could potentially be the team that, I don't want to call it reaching, because I don't think it's reaching at all, but by the media standards would be considered reaching, and that's Pittsburgh taking Hunter Brzustewicz. Pittsburgh is a team that is definitely going to be needing their power play quarterback of the future, with Letang getting older and with how much he's been going through lately. It's hard to say how much longer of a career a guy like him can sustain with all that he's been through. And that's not to take anything away from him. He has gone through so much this year. He's probably going to win the Masterton Trophy for everything that he's gone through. And he's been so mentally tough to go through it all and to keep playing. But, at some point that all takes its toll, and he's definitely getting older, and he's dealt with health problems his entire career. And, eventually, for his own sake, he's going to have to hang him up. And I think that the reason why I like Hunter Brzustewicz so much is he is an incredible playmaker with the puck. He is somebody who's always looking for that pass that's going to create a play. He's really great at getting the puck out of the zone. Really great on the power play. If you ever got a chance to watch a Kitchener power play this year, he was a guy who would hold the zone incredibly well, control the puck. He would take on players that were aggressive on the forecheck, and he would beat them with his skating, and he would find a wide open guy for a one-timer, and he got a lot of assists that way this year. So when you look at his offensive abilities, there's no doubt in my mind, and there should be no doubt in anyone's mind, that he is a first-round talent offensive defenseman. I think where a lot of people potentially question him is they want him to be more physical. They think that he could be better in his own end. I don't see a lot of those same glaring issues in his defensive play. I think that he'll occasionally be a little bit out of position, but not nearly as bad as some of the other guys in this draft that people have ranked higher. I think that people just didn't get the chance to watch him this year. And it's confusing to me because he finished first in the OHL among draft eligible defensemen in points and assists, specifically because he was such a good playmaker. Doesn't score a whole lot of goals, but is definitely capable of it. I think he had 10 this year. So I have him compared to Shane Gostisbehere. He reminds me a lot of Gostisbehere when he first came into the league with the Flyers, and how he totally revolutionized their power play and was just such a fantastic part of that team that helped them make the playoffs. So I think Brzustewicz, as teams get an opportunity to pay attention to him just a little bit more down the stretch of this draft process, I think that they're going to like him a whole lot more. When you look at the CHL Top Prospects game as well, when they had all the drills leading up to it, he was one of the best players in all the skating drills with the puck. Now, I think that that's kind of shows where he needs to improve. He needs to be better without the puck, but with the puck, I think he might be the best defenseman in this draft. I truly do. Moving on to the 15th overall pick, we've got the Nashville Predators, and the Predators are definitely in an interesting situation here where I think that they just need to go after the best player available. They could definitely use to fill a lot of slots, but I think mainly they just need to infuse some youth into this roster. They started to do that at the end of last season, and they actually played quite well with a lot of young players in their in their lineup, which will be doing wonders for their development going forward. So I think just adding another guy who has a good amount of talent, who is just projectable to the NHL, that you feel very safe can be an NHL player. So that's what Brayden Jaeger. I realize I've misspelled his name there, but Brayden Jaeger, that's what he brings to this organization, I believe. He is a good-sized player. He's going to have to put on some weight, but he's a good playmaker, good enough in his own end, something he's going to have to work on more, because I think he's going to have to be a guy who plays that style of game as a two-way centerman. But overall, that's why I think Brayden Jaeger, good pick for the Nashville Predators. Moving on to the 16th pick, Calgary Flames selecting Otto Stenberg. Now, he's a guy that I wasn't necessarily high on at the start of the season, but I do like that he got a lot of time in with Frölunda in the SHL. He's definitely a guy who I think needs to work. I was going to say that, but that's totally wrong. He's a guy who's really good in both ends of his ice. I've seen more of him lately, and especially at the Worlds, I thought he, and I know I'm kind of going back on what I said before. I don't really like to use the words Worlds a whole lot, but I thought he really improved his stock at the Worlds. Showed that he is one of the best offensive players within that age group, and but also showed that his effort level is really high. And there's quite a few things that I think the Flames are going to need to look at over the next little bit. I think that, you look at your team and you got a guy like Backlund, who's been there forever, who, is probably nearing the end of his career, that, Stenberg can potentially be him, even maybe a better version of what Backlund was, at least offensively. He might not be able to bring the same things to the table defensively, but if you can kind of coach him to be in that same realm, then I think he fits the mold of this roster fairly well. Next up, we have Axel Sandin Pellikka going to the Montreal Canadiens in the pick that they got from the Florida Panthers. Now, this might be quite a bit lower than what a lot of people, thought he would end up being. Some people think he's the best defenseman in the draft, and obviously he had a really good Worlds when talking about, his point production. But there are definitely some glaring issues that I have with his game, and mainly they are decision making. I think that he often tries to force passes into areas that he shouldn't be doing it. He struggles, I think, a little bit with the defensive side of the game. But there's definitely still upside there, and I think that people are right to have him as a first round talent type player. But I think that it's going to be a longer curve for him to become a good NHL player than people really think when it comes to him. He'll flash with some plays sometimes where he holds onto the puck and kind of goes end to end, and that's great. But I think defensively he's got things that he's got to work on. But I think when you're in the Montreal Canadiens, you're in a situation where you just need to add players with high upside, and I do think that he has high upside. So and especially on defense, they just need to keep building things there. Definitely for them right now, I would say they don't have a true number one defenseman in their system. They have a lot of guys who are good number 2 or 3s right now, and I think that with as many picks as they're going to have out over the next little bit, I think that the Canadiens can kind of just start to take swings on defensemen that they hope will be future number 1s. With the 18th pick, we got the Red Wings here in the pick that they got from, I believe, the Canucks, who originally got it from the Islanders. So we got Lukas Dragasevic here, and he is a really good puck-moving defenseman for Tri-City in the WHL. He's going to have to work on his defensive game, I think, a fair bit, but he's definitely a guy with good upside and just adds another piece to that blue line that the Red Wings could kind of use on the right-hand side, because obviously they got Seider on the right side, and then on the left side they're going to have Edvinsson and Wallinder coming along fairly soon. Great prospects that I really like. So you kind of round things out in your top 4 by bringing in a guy like Dragasevic, who is a good power play guy. Would definitely be a good guy to have on the second unit with Edvinsson. I think that they could make a really good second pairing on the power play. And I have him at his comparable as Chabot, because a lot of the things he does, his skating and offensive abilities reminds me a lot of Thomas Chabot. But defensively, like Chabot, still has some things to work on in his game. So, but I think, as it's been proven, Chabot's a really effective player in the NHL, and Dragasevic can be the same way, I think. Next up is Edward Chalet. Now, this is potentially a fall for some people, or potentially right where they think that he should be. I know that, near the start of the year, I think it was Craig Button had Edward Chalet as his 5th overall player at one point. And there's a lot of reasons to believe why a guy like Chalet could be a high upside player, because he shows a lot of talent, and he's a good productive player in the Czech league. Definitely has to put on a little bit of size, but the main issue with him is his effort level. I think a lot of people are worried that his game's not going to translate as well to the North American ice, and I think that that's definitely a legitimate concern, and it's something that will have to be watched going forward. But, if it does work out, then you're looking at the Winnipeg Jets selecting 2 guys in Edward Chalet and Brad Lambert, who fell to them that probably shouldn't have been available, potentially. We will see. Just 2 guys that were really considered to be high-end talent that fell a little bit later for them, and I think Winnipeg is happy being that team that kind of picks up on those teams that picks up on those players that have a little bit of risk associated with them. Moving on next to the Chicago Blackhawks in a pick that they got from the Tampa Bay Lightning for Brandon Hagel. They will be selecting Gabe Perot here, and Perot is potentially a guy that could go a whole lot higher than this, because I think aside from Will Smith, he might be the guy on the U.S. development team that has the most skill. He did finish second, I believe, with them in point. Actually, he may have finished first. I think Will Smith maybe just had less games played. But either way, I mean, Gabe Perot, just really, really high offensive motor. And one of the things that I liked about him when watching was that he was the guy that was often taking on the defensive responsibilities that Will Smith was, kind of leaving behind. And I was impressed with him from that perspective too. I think that he's a guy that could potentially develop as a bit of a two-way winger, which is fantastic because he's got such a high offensive upside. I think that the ceiling is really high here. I have his comparable as Victor Arvidsson, but I think that he could surpass a guy like that with his offensive abilities. But I think, at the very least, you're getting a guy who's going to be like Victor Arvidsson. And I think for Chicago right now, they've already drafted Bedard here, but they're looking to just infuse as much talent into a prospect pool that's still really needing it. And so I think Perot, offers them a really good other option there. And, we'll join guys like Nazar and Korchinski and Sam Renzel even. I liked that pick a bit more as the year went on. So going into next year, just starting to infuse more into that prospect pool to help Bedard down the road. Next up is the Seattle Kraken, and I have them selecting Quentin Musty, and really the main reason why I really love mocking Quentin Musty to the Seattle Kraken is because they already have David Goyette in their system, and they are 2 players that over the course of this past season mostly proved to have really good chemistry with each other. So Musty being the winger on Goyette's line there in Sudbury. Musty had a great offensive season. I believe he finished with the 2nd most points among draft-eligible forwards in the OHL this year. And he is a really interesting player. He's got good size, really good playmaking ability. When I was first there and working for the team, I mainly noticed him for his shooting, but he really developed as a playmaker this year. He's a guy who you'd like to see him put in 100% effort every single game. I think sometimes he takes a little bit off, and that's something that he needs to work on. Aside from that, in the past he was taking really stupid penalties, really undisciplined plays behind the play. And I think that's something that he definitely worked on a whole lot this season, because it was something he was doing a lot less from what I could tell. And, biggest highlight of his season was when I believe he had 7 points in a game against Niagara, 6 assists and a goal. So he's the kind of guy that can really turn a game on its head for you, and but he's still fiery, and that's what I like. So you don't want to take away the penalty side of him totally, because he is really similar to a guy like Max Domi. He's a guy who's going to stick up for his teammates, stick up for himself. He's physical, so he's got aspects to his game that I think make him very NHL pro ready. He just has to make sure that he's smart about it, and I think that's definitely something he can achieve. So definitely a bit higher than I think some people have him. Some people think that with some of those attitude, I don't want to call it attitude, but some of those discipline issues, might have him falling to the second round. I think that he's a potential slam dunk in the first round. Next up, we got the Minnesota Wild. We'll have them selecting Nate Danielson. Personally, for me, their biggest hole is still at the center position. They have great centers, don't get me wrong. They don't have a number 1 center, in my opinion. I mean, Eriksson Ek is a good player, but he doesn't really maximize the skill of Kirill Kaprizov on the first line. Now, I still don't think Nate Danielson is that guy either. He almost fits the mold of what they already have, in my opinion. But at this point in the draft, I do think he's the best available. For me, he's got a really high floor. He's going to be an NHL player regardless how you cut it. He is really smart, good on both ends of the ice, but he does have a good offensive ability. He was unfortunately handicapped by playing for not a great Brandon squad this year in the WHL. I have his comparison as Sam Bennett. I don't think he has the same physical edge as Sam Bennett, but I think his offensive skill is kind of on par with Sam Bennett, and I think just being that kind of well-rounded player. But at the same time, I think he has the potential to be a more physical player. I mean, he's a good sized guy. Bring him to the NHL, put him in a role where he's no longer the star on his team, and you tell him work for your spot. I think he'll develop that more physical edge. So definitely an interesting player to keep an eye on in this stage of the draft. Next up, we've got the Columbus Blue Jackets, and this is a pick that they got from LA, I believe, for the Gavrikov trade. So Gavrikov and Korpisalo, I should say. And they will be selecting Riley Heidt, who was a really good playmaking winger this year in the WHL for Prince George. Don't want to dwell on him a whole lot, but really good production this year, and reminds me of Kevin Fiala. I think that the Blue Jackets just kind of need to keep drafting the best forwards available. They've kind of got their defense of the future figured out. Just keep drafting forwards, high upside offensively, and then, as it goes on to the later rounds, kind of focus more on those role guys that are going to fill in the depth. But I really like the direction that the Columbus Blue Jackets are headed in. I think they've got a lot of really solid defensemen. They're going to have to find a goalie at some point if Merzlikins doesn't return to his old self. But overall, really like the direction of this Columbus Blue Jackets team from a prospect perspective. Moving on to the New York Rangers, we're going to have them selecting Gavin Brinley from Michigan. Now, he was a very productive player for a very good Michigan team as a freshman this year. He is a little undersized, but I think if he puts on a little bit of weight, then it's not going to matter a whole lot. But quick winger with good skills. I think he's got a little bit of feistiness like Connor Garland, which is why I've got that comparison there. Especially being a little bit of a shorter guy like Garland is as well. So I think that for the Rangers right now, they're looking for guys who are as close to NHL ready as possible, and I think Brinley is pretty close being an NCAA guy, in his freshman season. He's also, they're also potentially looking to replace guys like Lafreniere and Kakko, who may be traded out of there pretty quickly into their times with the Rangers because they just can't afford to sign them right now. There's a lot of contract issues, so bringing in a guy that could potentially play not right away, but potentially by the end of this next season for them, will go a long way for the Rangers, I think, right now. Next up, we've got the Nashville Predators and a pick they got from Edmonton in the Matthias Ekholm trade, and I have them selecting Mikhail Gulyaev. I've heard some people describe him as the best playmaking defenseman in this draft, and the best skating defenseman in this draft, and I've seen him for myself as well a little bit. There's some clips online for sure to see of him, and he is a good skater without a doubt. He might be the best skater out of the defensemen in this draft, just in pure speed, and definitely his agility is quite good too. He's good moving laterally with the puck. I'm still not super high on him defensively, but like with time in Russia, I'm sure he can develop that. Would like to see a bit more of physical or more active stick game from him without the puck. But there's definitely a lot to like here, I think, offensively, and I think that with the Predators right now, like I said, just adding as much young talent to this roster as possible right now. I don't think they have huge needs of defense. I think that offense is kind of more of a focus for them right now. But at the same time, they definitely need guys that can bring up the whole roster, and if they can get a guy who's a good breakout specialist like Gulyaev is, then I think that'll go a long way for them. Next up are the Sharks, and with the Sharks' next pick, obviously had Benson with their first pick. This one they got from the Devils in the Timo Meier trade. This one I'll have them using to acquire Oliver Bonk, defenseman from the London Knights. Bonk is definitely been one of my favorite prospects as far as being an NHL safe guy throughout the entire process. I think that he's a really good player in every way. I think that he's not going to come to the league and be a really offensive guy. I think that he has that upside if they need him to be that. But I think that if you really focus on his defensive aspects of the game, I think that that's where he's really going to thrive in the NHL. And I think he's going to carve out a really good career and a really good niche using those skills. And I think that with the Sharks right now, they've brought in Henry Thrun, they've brought in Shakir Mohammedoulin, so they're starting to build some pretty good blocks at the defensive position. I think that Bonk is just another piece that will help elevate them, in the future. Next up, we've got the Colorado Avalanche, and I have them selecting Calum Richie from the Oshawa Generals. Early on in the process, and even to this point, I haven't been super high on Calum Richie. I really liked him last season, in his rookie season in the OHL. I thought he was really impressive then. But he's he didn't really take the step forward that I was really expecting from him this season, that I was hoping to see. Now, he's a good size player. He's a guy who puts in a lot of effort, and there's definitely flashes of the skill every now and again, but I think it just wasn't where I wanted it to be. Now, that being said, I think the Colorado Avalanche picking him is a good opportunity. They're going after a guy that they know has the upside of being a really good player, who has the tools to be a good depth guy if the skill doesn't really elevate him. So I think it's kind of a no-risk move for the Avalanche, who just need guys to fill the bottom six at the very least. And I think it's a good fit for Richie as well. With the 28th pick, we've got the Toronto Maple Leafs selecting with the pick they got from, they got it from Washington, who got it from Boston in the Sandin trade. We'll have them selecting Jaden Perrone. Now, Jaden Perrone is a really small winger, and Toronto fans might be thinking that they're more interested in the kind of grittier guys right now, especially what they've seen from Matthew Nyes. They're saying, we want guys with size to fill that top six. I think that if you see Jaden Perrone, it'll kind of change your mind on that, because he is a really smart and really offensively gifted forward out of Chicago in the USHL. That also means that he's had a lot of time to play with Nicholas Moldenhauer, who is a great Leafs prospect who's coming up as well. Yeah, he's a small guy, but I think that you kind of watch his game, and his height definitely doesn't affect the way he plays. And I think if you're the Leafs right now, you're just looking for as many high upside guys that can fill the slots for cheap on the rookie deals, as soon as possible to help this current core get over the hump and make it to the finals and win a Stanley Cup, because that's the goal right now for the Leafs. And I think that a guy like Perot really gives them that opportunity. Next up, we've got the St. Louis Blues in the pick that they got from the Rangers in the Tarasenko deal that originally came from Dallas in the Nils Lundqvist deal. I just had them selecting Dimitri Smihov, big defenseman from Russia who, not an offensive player really at all, but just a guy with good size and defensive ability who was nearly a full-time player in the KHL this year, which is really impressive as a draft-eligible player. Definitely something that you like from a development standpoint, and if they give him a couple of years more to develop over in Russia, I think he'll come over as a really polished defensive player, and really for the Blues is just a nice piece for them to add. And back-to-back picks here for the Blues. They are selecting in the pick that they got from Toronto in the Ryan O'Reilly and Noel Acciari deal. So with this pick, I'll have them selecting Ethan Gauthier, the top draft-eligible forward from the QMJHL this year. He is a good offensive player. He got good chemistry this year with, I believe it was Justin Gill, who had a really good season as a guy who missed his draft year last year. That will probably go in the later rounds this year. Just another piece to add to this lineup. They've kind of got some good centers now in the system, so adding another winger just kind of makes sense for them right now. With the 31st pick, we've got the Vegas Golden Knights selecting Danish forward Oscar Fisker Mulgaard, and he is a guy that I think went under people's radar kind of most of this season, but was really impressive, carved out a niche to play in the SHL for the majority of the year. Solid two-way centerman, really good speed, good talent, production not all that high, but not to be expected when he didn't get a whole lot of ice time over there. I think that he is a guy that will carve out a nice niche as like a third-line center in the NHL, with good offensive and defensive upside, a guy who can kill penalties, potentially be on your second power play. So definitely something that fits the mold of what the Golden Knights need going forward. And with the 32nd pick, another pretty interesting one, because I think most people probably have him in the late second round, but I've been a big fan of Idar Sunyev in the late part of this draft evaluation process here. He is a guy with good size, but really to me what stands out is his speed and his skill. He plays for the Penticton Vs of the BCHL. He is a very interesting player. I'm really curious to see how he develops, but his production was off the charts this year. Very, very good at the BCHL level. So he'll be heading to college next year. I'm blanking on where he's going, but I think I don't want to be wrong, but I think he's going to either Boston College or Denver. Either way, really good places for development wherever he ends up. I know it's going to be a place that he develops quite well in. And I think for the Hurricanes, what I love about their prospect pool and the way that they can draft is they can always go for the guys with the high upside that they don't have to worry too much about the floor. Now, even with this guy, I mean, with his size and his abilities to, potentially he can become a more physical player and carve out that role for himself if his skill doesn't translate to the NHL. But I do think that it will. Just for the Hurricanes, they get that opportunity to take a chance on a guy that, potentially other teams will overlook. But anyways, so that is the first round of my 2023 mock draft. So please let me know down below in the comments if if there's any players that you think I missed, if there's players that you'd like me to do a more in-depth evaluation on. Just give me more ideas for things you would like to see from this channel, and hopefully I get to see a whole bunch of you back in my first video in nearly a year now.